You need
You're a
some
fearless
ice,
leader.
some significant burn, Ed, and
Why
get
don't you
some
shut
ice
up,
for
Ned?
Evan.
No, I didn't mean it that way.
Okay, today the topic is space, the final frontier. So, I thought this first, I don't know if you guys don't want to spend any time, we don't have to, but I thought the sort of introductory pages here on intuition were nice since we had been batting around to intuition last time, and he gives us some. I don't know if he gives us clarity, but anyway, he gives us. Actually, he just generates a whole lot more definitions. But any thoughts on or questions about intuition and
So many. I mean, where do you want to begin? Is my understanding of intuition like accurate? I don't really feel like I have a good concept of concepts versus intuition, to be honest with you. Like the way I understood is like a concept is kind of like something that like you build up on, and an intuition is something that is the basis for that concept. I suppose. I don't know. Still kind of struggling with that one.
I'm taking intuition as that which is immediately given. Um,
Yeah, but what the hell
and
does
ex-
that like? Yeah,
uh, well, just what's immediately given through sensation, so through the senses, without prior to any reflection.
but he says space isn't an object, and it's not derived from the space. It's like he suggests it's a priori. So how can it be an institution?
well,
Or
there's two things there. Maybe we should be careful differentiating. There's intuition, which what is what Mario was talking about, and then there's the form of intuition, which is space. And then he also talks about the intuition of space, which frankly it confuses me. But intuition and space are not the same thing.
well, he kind of makes an like almost an in. He seems to be like implying that like space is almost like the ideal form of intuition, like pure. Like this is something that's almost a priori. You can't really experience it, but is it like a receptacle for sensibility? Which is where I'm kind of like
Well,
not fully.
I guess what I was describing is empirical intuition, and that's on page 73 at the very top, um, um, which is the end of B34. Yeah, he says intuition that refers to the object through sensation is called empirical intuition. So I'm not sure if when he's just saying intuition, like when he's talking about space as an intuition, he's talking about pure space.
And actually, in this first, these first few pages, the little section one at the beginning of the Transcendental Aesthetic, he doesn't he doesn't talk about space near as I can see until the second to the last sentence. And so these first few pages here about intuition are not talking about wait, actually then it does say later on the pure form of sensible intuitions. So then
Right. That
he doesn't
yeah.
actually name that space, but yeah. So but anyway, so he starts off initially just talking about intuition, and then he starts talking about this pure intuition, like Mario said, we've got the empirical intuition, and then anyway, I'm just rambling. Lots of vocabulary, matter, form,
I
intuition,
yeah.
pure intuition.
I'm trying to get my vocabulary down, or at least my understanding of the vocabulary down early with my notes with Kant, like with Hegel, because on 79, like he does make the conclusion that therefore the original presentation of space is an a priori intuition, not a concept. And I'm kind of I guess, struggling with the idea that if there's like empirical intuition that is like, derived from sensory experience, what is this kind of like pure form of sensible, like, what is that?
I'm also not understanding the idea of form and intuition being connected because earlier he talks about form, defining form. This is in the second edition, I think, of the Geyer Wood translation. It should be in 172 towards the bottom. He talks about matter and form as being distinct. Like sensation doesn't, or the sensible maybe doesn't pertain to form. But then when he's speaking about intuition, he says this pure form of sensibility. And maybe I got lost in his language, but I noted that down as a moment of possible contradiction. Again, I want to give him the benefit of the doubt, but if anyone could clear that up, because I'm also not seeing how an intuition, if it is appearing to us, how it is pure.
Yeah, because what I was struggling with was page 80 in the Pluhar too. This intuition, however, must be encountered in us a priori prior to any perception of an object. Hence, the intuition must be pure rather than empirical, as Nevitt had claimed. So that's where I'm kind of like, well, I thought I got it, but now I don't.
But that's different from the empirical intuition
Right.
that, so there's the empirical intuition, and then there's that thing that you were just reading about.
So I have this idea that came to mind that I've had before, and I'm not sure if it's accurate, so correct me if I'm wrong. But
Oh,
when
geez.
I think about like Spinoza's God, it's just like, a totality, right? I if I try to imagine that, I still imagine it in space. Like even if it's some white room and it's just like this totality floating there. It I can't I can't get rid of the this intuition of space. So that's what he's saying. Like even if you strip all everything that is subjective about space from space, there still remains this idea of space that we can't think outside of that.
We can't think about the empirical world outside of that. So, I mean, one way, can you, even in your imagination, can you think of an object that is, how let's put it, an object that would be a sensory object that would not be spatial?
Right. Like, try to think about something that doesn't exist. You're going to be constrained to the environment of how you're affected by things from like an empirical intuition, right? Like, even our imagination is based on the material experiences that we have in the world. It's constrained to it. It's like how even our art, like when we were discussing Heidegger, it's like all based in some form of temporality because that's the experience of Dasein. Like even the afterlife that we perceive is based on a concept of temporality unique to the human condition. So it's like, is is he suggesting that's what space is, or the pure form of space, like how the aspects of empirical intuition can even be placed upon us?
Yeah, I look at what Tori wrote in the comments. The reason space is tied to our outer sense, in the sensory world, is because space is not something derived from our outer experiences. It must already be present for us to relate sensations to objects outside ourselves.
Oh, okay. So kind of, yes, it's like the framework, I suppose, for how we have the empirical intuition, or like the limit of how we can engage with objects, or like maybe the framework one could call it.
Yeah.
The form of empirical, I mean, it's literally the form in which empirical objects appear, take shape. But then you have the empirical intuitions themselves. So this is, the very beginning of this part one. In whatever way, this is like the first sentence. In whatever way, in the Pluhar, in whatever way and by whatever means a cognition may refer to objects, still intuition is that by which a cognition refers to objects directly, at which all thought aims as a means. Intuition, however, takes place only this is like what Mario was saying, only insofar as the object is given to us. But that in turn is possible only for us human beings, at any rate, by the minds being affected by the object in a certain manner. The capacity or receptivity to acquire presentations as a result of the way we are affected by objects is called sensibility. So he's connecting that notion of intuition to which a few other people have mentioned, to sensibility, which is, I take literally, I don't know how to say this without saying something wrong, but the five senses.
Um, so right after, on page 73 of the Pluhar, again, end of B34. Right after that sentence where he says empirical intuition, the next sentence, the undetermined object of an empirical intuition is called appearance. I don't know. Like, what the hell does it mean? The undetermined object. Maybe I'm just confused. I'm definitely confused.
Yeah,
I
maybe
kind
it's
of
referring to the point in the process of cognizing it. I think someone's putting that in the chat.
Yeah.
That would be its most primitive appearance to you.
I see. Okay.
Well, I also think it doesn't need to be like a part of it doesn't need to like be a part of like a temporal process of like you're thinking or looking and like there's this primitive version. I just think it's as a sort of just thing to talk as a concept. I think it's just this is when there's no determinate, or like when there's always going to be something determining it. But before we get to talking about that, what do we have already? Before we get to talking about the determinations, what do we already have? We at least have an appearance. That's the basic name for whatever else you're about to tell me about what's determining it. You know what I mean? It's a category.
I mean, the next paragraph then is, I think, is helpful. Whatever in an appearance corresponds to sensation, I call it matter. But whatever in an appearance brings about the fact that the manifold of the appearance can be ordered in certain relations, I call the form of appearance. Now, that in which alone sensations can be ordered and put into a certain form cannot itself be sensation, so then it would have to be a priori. So what he's calling matter there is so there's maybe this is jumping too much ahead, but there's sort of a passive and an active aspect to our experience, and like I think Mario was saying, the sensory intuition is what's given to us. Like it's not in the mind already, it comes at me. But the form is, in a sense, already there, ready to catch it and do something with it.
Right. I mean, I'm taking it that matter is something like he refers to it as the manifold of experience at some point. It's just raw data, whereas form I'm taking to be whatever makes sense of that data once you get access to it. It's kind of like a empirical versus rational setup kind of that he's building in.
Yeah, I'll let Eric or somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems Kant is coming after Descartes and Hume, and he's borrowing from both the empiricists and the rationalists. So I think, which you seem to be implying. So the sensory part is kind of his nod to the empiricists, but then the form part is kind of a nod to the rationalists. So Eric's giving me a thumbs up. So I must not said something terribly stupid. I just have this terrible experience that when I go, when we stop at the end of the thing, or even when I have a conversation about this stuff with people, I go home and I'm like, God, that was a stupid thing to say. So I'm always wondering how many stupid things I'm saying.
Maybe you're on the track to genius. No, but because apparently that's how Wittgenstein felt after every lecture.
No, remember,
I'm
I had a
actually
professor.
stupid. Like I, like
I've already had a professor tell me, remember the story, that I'm not crazy enough to be one of the really smart ones. So
You can always get crazy.
that's true. Yeah, I could be like Don Quixote. Not all of you are here.
you beat me to it. I was gonna say you could totally like do the Don Quixote.
So you got that, the stuff that's given to us, the matter, and then the form that is already there, as I said, ready to catch it. And then he says in the next paragraph, all presentations in which nothing is found that belongs to sensation. So I guess that would mean like not including the matter part in the transcendental sense of the term. I call pure in the transcendental sense. Accordingly, the pure form of sensible intuitions, generally in which everything manifold in experiences intuited in certain relations, will be found in the mind a priori. And then the pure form of sensibility will also itself be called pure intuition. So there, we had empirical intuition, and now we have pure intuition.
Nevitt, what page was that on that you were just speaking?
It was
73.
73 in the Pluhar, right around B35.
Okay.
B34, yeah, at the end, yeah,
B34.
B30, yeah, yeah, at the beginning of 35, end of 34, yeah.
Yeah. And then, what is it that is part of this pure intuition? I'm talking just because nobody else is. Well, he says, thus, if from the presentation of a body I separate what the understanding thinks in it, such as substance, force, divisibility, etc., and if I similarly separate from it what belongs to sensation in it, such as impenetrability, hardness, color, I am still left with something from this empirical intuition, namely extension and shape. These belong to pure intuition, which, even if there is no actual object of the senses or sensation, has its place in the mind a priori as a mere form of sensibility. So what does he mean by that when he's saying this extension and shape then belong to pure intuition? Because even if there is no actual object, those features are there a priori as the form of sensibility.
I think he makes a distinction between empirical intuition and pure intuition because that allows him to correlate pure intuition with synthetic a priori judgments, which is the form of geometry and mathematics. That's why he gives the example later of the sphere and circle and so on. He says, well, that's pure intuition. We intuit that a sphere has certain, qualities, or although there's no perfect real sphere in the world. So that's why it says these belong to pure intuition, which even if there's no actual object of the senses, I mean, there's no real sphere or circle or perfect triangle, we can feel in the mind a priori as a mere form of sensibility its qualities. I guess. That's how I interpreted it. But I still don't know what intuition is.
Right? I'm with you. Right there with you.
I've always thought of intuition as like this immediate grasping of an object. Whereas what that means is that you need to have an object, and before anything can be said about that object, there's a presupposition, which would be space, right? But the intuition, I don't know. I'm not sure if I would be I'm going to be too specific about it, but it's just this immediate grasping of the object without anything being said about it otherwise. Somebody please correct me if I'm wrong on that.
So one thing that, so I do think you're mostly right about that. I think that's so in the notes in the first edition, it says that added in Kant's copy, intuition is related to the object, sensation merely to the subject. So good little basic dichotomy for us to understand what's going on there, which I think somewhat tells you about what that intuition would be. Especially so in relation to sensation has to do with the subject. So sensibility is this receptive faculty, this receptive capacity to acquire representations through the way in which we are affected by objects. So there's this whole kind of thing about being affected by objects that kind of go along with this whole account of what intuition and sensation is. So I think the idea is that this kind of the subject as it's affected by objects in this receptive capacity, that sensibility, and then the actual kind of subjective effects of it are sensations, and then the objects that you get in a representation would be the intuition. So that would be an empirical intuition where there's also kind of like these pure forms and then the actual ones themselves, the particulars. So yeah, I think that's what's at least that's the way that that note about this distinction between intuition, object, sensation, subject, I think that helped me grasp a little more about what's going on. Whereas yeah, we're affected by objects that give us representations, and then those representations themselves in their as an immediate representation are intuitions. And then the faculty of that would be the sensibility. Although I think he counts intuition as a faculty as well. Not totally sure about that, but I don't know. At least that's my way of trying to think about what's going on here.
That's fair. I think intuition, he demarcates. I mean, he'll say more about intuition as we develop it, but at this point, intuition, and then he's describing sensible intuition, right? Which is so sensibility is a type of intuition, and he'll get onto intellectual intuition by contrast later.
I have some clues. So in B33, he describes intuition, allegedly, according to my notes, as, which, you know, I could also just look at my book, which is right there, but I wrote down, and I only wrote down like direct quotes, that by which a cognition refers to all objects directly, and that by which all thought aims as a means. So just the first half of that by which a cognition refers to all objects directly. I don't know if he means directly as in like immediately, but that makes me think of like my immediate like sense of a thing that I'm looking at, like what I'm getting from it instantaneously. I don't know if that's accurate, but that's sort of what I got from that.
Yeah, I think it could be something immediate as I don't know who Adam. I think I don't know. That's your name, Adam. Aiden. You mentioned before that there was an immediate apprehension of an object. So, but what I have problem, what the problem I have with that sentence is the meaning of the cognition refers to object. What does refer to mean? That's what I don't understand.
I guess the object being like this Kantian thing in itself, in cognition referring to that thing in itself means like whatever our cognition represents of that thing. That's the most sense I can make out of it. So if I'm leading astray, somebody please chime in.
It would be the thing in itself. It would not be a cognition of the thing in itself, but the cognition of any object whatsoever is going to be a cognition of that object through an intuition. In our case, sensible intuition. If it's an external object, spatial intuition. If it's an internal object, temporal form of intuition.
What would an internal object be?
I'm angry. I'm angry you asked that question.
What about imagine or things you picture in your imagination, like I'm picturing an orange or something? Does that count? I think last time, didn't you say that was a kind of intuition?
Right. Well, that would be an intuition, right? But it would be spatial, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's still spatial. Yeah, it's just not. I don't know. I that one confuses me because I mean it's kind of sensory, but it's kind of not. I mean I experience it in my imagination as if it were a sensory object, but it's not out here. So whether that's external or internal, I'm confused by that.
No, but in response to your comment that we can't have an intuition of space as such,
Uh-huh.
I seem to remember maybe in one of the footnotes, I can't remember where, him kind of talking about this, where he says if we could have such a thing, then I can't remember exactly what he says, but something along the lines of if we could have such a thing, then we wouldn't talk about the space of objects.
He's
Yeah.
kind of already alluding to intellectual intuition there.
I mean, my question. So, what is, and it seems to me because because I have this question, I kind of had my antenna up when I was reading this, and to me, it seems like the way he writes, I can't figure out what he means exactly. But the way I think about it is, I never have. So this is what I think, and I could be totally wrong. I don't have a direct intuition of space. I have empirical intuitions, which means I have experience of things spatially conditioned. But that's, and then I because anything I ever experience that has sensory content is spatial, has what was an extension in shape, that there must be an a priori, as Joseph says, framework of space that is already sitting there waiting to, in a sense, spring into action when data, to use Tori's term, when sensory data comes in, it kind of spatializes it. But I was thinking then what that means is I can't actually have an intuition of space per se. In other words, can I have an intuition of space absent any objects? And I want to say no, but then there's places in here where he seems to say
He
yes,
says
you can.
yes. He says yes. Yeah.
So where does he say yes?
Okay, let me find it. When he says that you can imagine an empty space, okay, let me see. What I mean, we present, okay, sorry, it's space. I can find it. Space, okay, I think it's a B39, page 78, paragraph 2. He says, space is a necessary a priori presentation that underlies all outer intuitions. We can never have a presentation of there being no space, even though we are quite able to think of there being no objects encountered in it. I don't know if that.
But see, that doesn't conclusively say to me that you can actually have an intuition of space as such, empty space. I mean, you can imagine it, but
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 isn't
he said we
but
cannot
isn't
have a presentation of no space, so we can have a presentation of
but
space.
isn't he assuming that we can, I don't know what word to use, understand, um uh experience objects?
that we can experience.
That's where I'm leaning more towards Alistair's approach, is that like I don't base my understanding of space on particulars. It's a schema. It's a necessary schema in order to have these experiences. So it almost seems like, and I don't understand the term transcendental well enough, but I'm wondering if this is like part of what he's suggesting in his transcendental idealism, is that space in its pure form is that schema that is essentially required by humans in order to engage with objects.
Yeah, I'm not saying that you can infer or deduce space from objects. I mean, he explicitly denies that. But what I mean is, can you have an empirical intuition of space, period? In other words, can you really have an intuition of absolutely empty space? I mean,
That wouldn't be an empirical intuition, right? Because the form of space is a priori. But you can imagine pure, unbounded, infinite space,
It's
even if there are no objects in it.
it's a
but
pure intuition.
I'm not even sure I can do that. I mean, because if I imagine, for example, if I imagine, what would that be? It would be like I imagine this giant black void, but that black void, I mean, is that space?
Well, can you imagine like any experience without space?
No, but exactly. Now that I have no problem with. But what I'm wondering, I mean, and maybe it's probably a trivial point that doesn't matter. What I'm saying is I I don't think Kant, and again, I think Alistair disagrees with me, but I don't think Kant would say you can have an intuition of space, period. Just space. I don't
Yep.
think you can have an intuition of space. I think space, like I said, is the form in which all empirical intuitions take. They all take that form. But can you have an intuition of space as such, absent any objects?
I get what you're saying, Nevitt. I don't have a particularly visual brain, but it's not, for lack of a better word, intuitive for me to imagine. Like that almost feels like trying to imagine nothing to me, as opposed to trying to imagine space.
Oh, I feel Hegel. I, I feel Hegel lurking in the
No.
background here.
That's what
Um,
Aiden says every time I talk.
Nevitt, but like just looking at you on this screen, how am I able to distinguish your glasses, your shirt, you from your background?
Right. So, I mean, what I'm saying is that I think he thinks that space is the form of external objects. So what that means is whenever I experience an object, I will experience it spatially. I will experience like you said, I experience all these objects in a spatial context here. But I mean, I think this Kant would say this is an impossibility. But if I had no empirical given no empirical intuition, I don't think I would experience space. I think that that it's the a priori form, but that a priori form in a sense is not activated until empirical intuitions impinge upon my faculties of understanding, and then whoosh, everything becomes a spatialized environment in which there are objects. That's my thinking.
I think the answer to your question would be what he says later when he sort of deconstructs the idea of space, saying that there's empirical space. The space is empirical and ideal at the same time, depending on your point of view. So it does exist as something empirical, but we only have the intuition of it. I mean, in our mind, it's ideal. Well, I mean, he explains it later. I don't remember how, but I don't know if that would be an answer to your question.
I would second what you just said, Nevitt. Just going back to like the first sentence, right? That everything comes from experience, but not. I'm sorry, originates in experience. First, like chronologically, experience happens first, but that doesn't mean it's justified or from experience. I forget. You guys can remember the line he used, right? Like starts. Everything we intuit starts with experience, but it's not from experience. Right? So that's I mean, I think that gives credence, right? We can't, our spatiality starts with experiencing things, but our spatiality isn't necessarily from the experience of things, because it's the condition by which we experience things, right? And with regards to like having an intuition of the form of space, I think he's trying to demonstrate that we can say some sensible things of the form of space, that it's infinite, that we don't think of discrete spaces. I mean, we do, but only as existing in one overarching space. So because we can say these kind of the metaphysical exposition of the concept of space is arrived at by representing the pure form of space and saying some determinate things.
So you're saying that Kant is saying that there's something going on that is permitting us, enabling us to have these spatial senses or sensibility that are not directly coming from experience. They must have another source.
In order for us to have any experience, we have to already be able to spatialize and temporalize.
But that doesn't come from our lived reality itself.
It's a condition.
Yeah, like I think Nevitt making a fair point. If we don't experience a reality outside of ourselves, what cause would we have to even begin to imagine and start to ask these questions about spatiality and temporality? So it begins with experience, but it's not justified from experience.
No, but that's what I'm saying is, and I don't want to use the word mental construct, but it's an ordering principle. It's the way we understand the world we're experiencing.
Right.
Right, like
Okay.
a necessary objective condition for human interaction with the world.
Yeah.
So what is that? Oh,
No,
sorry,
go ahead.
let's go on. What does that like functionally mean? Like it begins in experience is not to say that it comes from experience. Like, so that sounds cool and like I want to agree with it, but does that mean that there's like some kind of hardware in us that's like primed to understand space once it sees it, or is that right?
Yeah,
I agree with that. Yeah, I would agree with that.
that's a good way to put it. Our hardware is constituted such
It's an
that
apparatus, yeah.
we must spatialize if we're going to experience anything outside of us.
Yeah, it actually is what happens in reality, because we perceive the world in 2 dimensions with each eye, and then the brain mixes those 2 images, puts them together, and we have this what Kant calls presentation or Vorstellung in our mind of a 3-dimensional space. So as he says later, objectively space exists as a three-dimension space, but also we construct it in our mind. I think that's how I understand it.
Although,
Sorry,
well,
no, I wanted to ask you more about this because I do see it the same way, right? So at the end, I think Kant is trying to say that object conforms to our like mode or knowing and not vice versa. So instead of space being something out there in the world and us learning it from the object, it's kind of like in us. I don't know if I can say it's a mental faculty, but it's yeah, it's a mental framework, no? So it's in ourselves and not out there, if it makes sense. So we presuppose it already when we perceive anything. But I'm not sure if it's I'm guessing Kant is also saying, oh, based on what Luis you were saying, that it can be an empirical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is what he says in B44, Pluhar edition is page 82. He says, space is real, objectively valid in regard to everything that we can encounter, but teaches at the same time that space is ideal in regard to things when reason considers them in themselves. So that's page B44, 82 in the Pluhar edition. So it's real and ideal at the same time. It's objective and subjective at the same time, I would say. I don't know.
It depends on your mode of attack.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. He deconstructs the idea of space. He could also say space. Yeah, well, yeah.
Insofar, yeah, we experience space as real, and insofar as we want to talk about the space that we experience in our experience, it's real.
Yeah.
But if you want to put on your philosopher hat and say, how do we know that space actually abides in a world apart from my subjective consciousness of space? Well, you can't. You can't know that, right? So we're going to say transcendentally, right? Space is ideal. Empirically, space is real. But when we put on the philosopher hat and start asking these questions like, what are things in themselves? Then we're kind of, Hume kind of took some of that away, you know what I mean? Like what we can say and what we can't say. And Kant is kind of honoring that.
I had a question from maybe like 5 minutes ago, but I don't know, maybe it's some of the difficulty in trying to like Nevitt's initial question was that it was a problem with like predication, and I don't know, like Eric, if that's a thing that um I don't know, as a reader we should be worried, like, cautious of, is trying to overly predicate, like, add predicates to like space, because by doing so you're like parsing it up in that way, and so like to be able to get the intuition of space, to like a conversation around the intuitions of space, I was having an impression, you could say, I don't know, like my thought immediately was that with the problem here seems that it was being predicated, and that was the problem, right? Like I feel like, does that sound about right? Like the conversation was, we were kind of predicating space too much initially.
Well, it's just part of the difficulty because explicitly he takes it up as a concept for metaphysical deduction, but before he wants us to understand that before it's ever a concept, it's a form of intuition.
yeah, and those are not the same thing. The form of intuition, you can have a concept about the form of intuition, but that concept is not the form of intuition. In fact, the form of intuition, that's why I'm saying because it's a form of intuition, I don't think you can have a direct intuition of it, because it is the condition for the possibility of having any kind of empirical intuition.
Well, the difference is between intuition and a form of intuition.
Exactly.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I think so.
So I was wondering something about that in terms of, so we can't have a empirical particular intuition of the pure form of intuition. But then for these truths of geometry we can have some kind of access to pure forms of intuition or for geometry space. And that's what is kind of his whole argument, that geometry is this great example of these a priori forms of intuition. Right? And then the other thing I was thinking about in regards to that is his whole kind of method as so in the introduction he talks about it, he compares it to chemical reduction, which I thought was quite interesting, where he talks about kind of sort of
Dialectic.
like extracting a purity from, like a raw material. I think that's what he's doing also when he goes through, I can't remember where exactly it is in this, but he talks about you start with like an empirical intuition, and then you extract the parts that are empirical from it, the particulars, and then you go further with that. I think it was something like what was eventually there's like some like medial layer in there, and then you extract further and you just get the pure form, which is form and extension. So from that, he then is like, okay, this is the pure form at that point. So in a way, that's kind of like, I think that's sort of like that's the roadmap to getting to a, maybe cognition is the right word, I'm not sure, some kind of thought cognition of the pure form of space or form of intuition. That's not itself just an empirical intuition. I don't know. Does that make sense?
I like it.
Makes sense.
I
That's
would
good enough for me then.
kind of what you just said and what Louis said earlier, right? If we think about what Kant is trying to do in terms of demonstrating how we arrive at synthetic a priori judgments, and this notion of pure intuitions does work to help explain geometry. So we've never seen a perfect circle, right? But we can say determinate synthetic. We can make synthetic propositions about perfect circles because we can have a pure intuition of a perfect circle. Well, whatever that pure intuition of a perfect circle, whatever canvas that's projected on, in order, you're imagining a perfect circle, whatever canvas that exists in or on, that is your pure form.
Yeah, the pure form for Kant is not a byproduct of mathematical construction.
I think it's the other way around.
Yeah,
Conditioned for the
Yeah.
possibility of mathematical
yeah,
construction.
that,
Right,
yeah.
yeah.
I was gonna say that, yeah. Mm.
And I made this comment last
Did I
time
say
about,
that backwards? I thought I was saying like it's not a mathematical construction. It is necessary for it in its pure form.
Yeah, yeah.
last time I talked about triangles, and you could use any geometric figure, but again, if you think about, Tori sort of brought up the problem of the possibility of non-Euclidean space. But if you assume Euclidean space, we say the sum of the angles of a triangle is exactly 180 degrees, exactly. And you will never be able to prove that empirically, because you will never be able to draw a perfect triangle. And, you could try to do it by induction, but the closest you're going to get there, which, Kant explicitly says, are probabilistic conclusions, like probably the sum of the angles of a triangle is 180 because we've measured 1 billion of them and it's always been really, really close. But you're never going to get the absolute necessity of geometric truths. And yet we do say they are necessary. We don't say they're probabilistic. When you say the ratio of the diameter to the circumference, I get that right, is pi
Yeah, the circumference to the diameter.
to the
The
diameter.
diameter to the
Yeah. So, but anyway, we don't talk about those in terms of approximations or probabilities. We talk about them in terms of certainties. And that's when, back to the Hume thing, when Hume's fork, when he was saying you've got these relations of ideas and then you have these matters of fact, it's difficult for him to explain the necessity of geometry and mathematics in a pure empiricist framework, because that, how are you going to, because he admits, yeah, you can know this without having to go do any exploring in the world. I mean, he admits that, but he has a hard time explaining why. And I think, Kant's like, well, I can tell you why.
And yeah, I don't know very much about non-Euclidean geometry, but I don't know that it mounts a serious challenge for Kant. I mean, if anybody who knows a bit more about non-Euclidean geometry, are they not also trying to make a priori synthetic truths with the same level of necessity as traditional geometry, or does it end up being kind of inductive and probabilistic?
No, it's deductive, but the weird thing is what what geometric conclusions you draw depends upon the axioms that you start with. And so if you start with Euclid's so-called parallel postulate, the fifth postulate, which just says if you have two lines crossed by a third, such that straight lines such that these interior angles add up to two right angles, those two lines are never going to meet. That's for Euclid, that's a postulate. He doesn't try to prove it. He just says this is the case. And if you accept that postulate, you get Euclidean geometry. You can deductively prove. But if you start with a different postulate, for example, that there is a small angle where you can tilt this top line down just a little bit and these lines still never meet, you make that a postulate, you can deductively prove a whole new system of geometry with the same deductive necessity, but the conclusions are different. So for example, in some forms of non-Euclidean geometry, the sum of the angles of a triangle depend on how big the triangle is. So you could think of it like if you think about mapping a triangle on a sphere. Well, if this triangle is very small, then the curvature of the sphere is going to be very low, so the sum of the angles is going to be very close to 180. But if the triangle gets big and it starts, having to spread out across the sphere, the sum of the angles of the triangles get larger. So in spherical geometry, you get the sum of the angles depends, but you can still prove these theorems with the necessity of deduction, but the conclusions are different. And our, and I think he's probably right that our intuitions are, I don't know, I don't want to use that word. The way we think about the world is Euclidean, but then it turns out, if you take relativity into consideration, space is not Euclidean. And so then there's this question as to whether Kant's account of space and time, and time is relative. Can Kant account for that? I haven't looked into it recently. My vague recollection is that some people say yes and some people say no.
Yeah, I think I've heard that there's some Kantians that argue that it's not necessarily like a death blow to Kant's idea. That so even if you accept that in a way, kind of like the details of what he's talking about as space are different, still I think the basic idea of a space as a synthetic a priori form of intuition can still be valid or legitimate in some way. At least that's the way I think of it.
And I don't know much about this. Maybe Tori or someone else does, but I think there are forms of geometry. I want to say Riemann geometry, but I'm not sure, that try to encompass, the total universe of possible geometries. And and I, what I'm wondering if maybe a Kantian might say that insofar as we accept that all those geometric systems generate necessary, you can deduce necessary conclusions, that it meets this characteristic of a synthetic a priori, because you can generate these necessary conclusions. Why can you do that? Even if there are multiple forms of geometry, they're all deductively provable. So they all have this characteristic of necessity, which, am I right, Eric? I mean, that's one of the things that when he was working in reaction to Hume is like, there's no way to know that these are necessary truths, but even if they're not Euclidean, they're still necessary in the sense of being deductive. So I don't know, Tori, I don't know much about like Riemann geometry and that sort of thing. I don't know if you do.
Not a mathematician, so not an expert in this area, but I do have some concerns about it. Particularly being that the space wouldn't have a fixed form anymore. That you could build up through taking an axiom and then making logical steps to a geometry, but not it would be in some way subjective, which isn't what he's claiming, right?
Well, I wouldn't say subjective. I mean, it depends upon the selection of propositions, and maybe that's subjective. But if you depending on the definitions and axioms you start with, isn't it true that I think you get a set of necessary deductions?
Right. I just think that the choice of accepting the fifth postulate or not is where the subjectivity enters into the equation. And I mean, obviously it's the 1780s. Kant's not gonna have any knowledge of alternative geometries, but I think it does throw a wrench into some of his
Right? Like,
claims.
where does the normativity of mathematics ultimately arise from?
Morality. No.
There you go. I'm
Shut
being
up, Chase.
really good, Chase.
But
proud
I
of you.
think that necessity point, I think that's a very good point, that because that is definitely part of this synthetic a priori forms of intuition, that they're necessary. So I think you could definitely challenge Kant on that. I think I think you would say what is opposed to necessary would be contingent, uh, rather than subjective, because
Yeah.
these whole like the forms of intuition themselves are subjective, which is kind of one of the big points he wants to make about this. They give us intuitions of objects, but they're subjective forms. But yeah, I think they're, as far as like the math aspect goes, I think that is I think like the biggest challenge to that Kantian account, that he does lean really heavily onto Euclidean geometry and connects that with the necessity aspect. But then if it's kind of contingent over which, form of necessity you're going to go with, like Nev was just talking about, like you can go with this set of axioms or this set of axioms, then it's kind of, I don't know, seems to complicate it, where there is some kind of aspect of like contingency to what we use to analyze and say like what space is, which I don't think Kant would want.
I think I was confused. I thought the necessity was less about the form of geometry we're using, but more so about the like conclusions we're drawing from it. And
Internally.
yeah, and
That's
Kant wants to say that if we want to have deductive necessity of any geometrical form we choose, then we still have to accept it as ideal. I guess I'm reading Eric's comment in the chat and feeling like that. I feel like Nevitt's point was a point for Kant, not against Kant, about necessity.
I was trying to kind of skew it that way. I mean, I honestly don't understand this stuff well enough to have a fixed opinion, but yeah, I mean, because it seems like, well, I'm just repeating myself, but a crucial aspect of the synthetic a priori claim is that you can have necessary truths that you can't derive from empirical, you can't derive from empirical experience itself. You can't, you can't, I guess, inductively maybe, or you can't like somehow extract these truths from empirical experience. They're ideal in the sense that you quote know, at least if you go through the proofs, that they absolutely have to be true, even if they're contingent in a sense because they depend on the axioms. But nevertheless, I think, and again, and I don't know, again, I know we know he's reacting to Hume in regard to Hume saying there is no necessity almost of any kind. It's all based on habit. And Kant saying, no, there really is real necessity. And in that sense, even non-Euclidean geometries seem to fit that feature of the synthetic a priori. But again, I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, on that, I mean, I did the whole quick, graduate student read right before the group. I was deep in the trenches in utility law before that. So maybe, this is just a factor of that. But I just kind of saw the Euclid points to be just like a demonstration, like a superfluous kind of just like, oh, hey, you nerds, y'all know about this. Like, here's the example I'm going to use because all you nerds know about like geometry and stuff. But it didn't come up. It didn't. As I was reading it, it didn't seem essential for nailing the argument down. It just seemed like a little, independent little song and dance he was doing to help like the math nerds like chill out and like grasp it. And I could be completely wrong, but like that's kind of the vibe that I was getting from he was like, okay, well here's this thing about geometry since, I talk about Descartes, all Descartes, so here you go, here's your Descartes like callback. Because like, again, if we're like going back and forth between like he's replying to like Hume, but also he's like taking Descartes and all these other like so-called idealists to task on the issue, then it seems like as a literary point, like that'd be good. It's good for the exposition, but it didn't seem like it was necessary for like pinning the argument down. Like he could have done without it. Is essentially, I guess, what I'm saying. Or am I or is is that a decent read or a bad read?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, honestly, to my mind, it seems non-Euclidean geometry feels if you think it's more fatal for Newton because he's holding out this absolute conception of space. So Newton thinks that space, taken as it is, apart from our perception of it, our knowledge of it, our experiences of it, is three-dimensional and absolute, and it's Euclidean. Well, if it turns out that our best empirical ways of describing reality indicate a different foundation for geometry, a non-Euclidean foundation for geometry, that right there doesn't quite challenge, I think, space as a form of intuition. It just maybe what theory we use to describe that particular form is most adequate for our empirical reality. And that's a matter for the reasoning to develop the understanding. That's a purely empirical fair, right? Like which scientific and mathematical theories are best for describing the world we live in today? That's an empirical matter, right? That's something that reason is regulating the understanding towards a greater understanding of the world. I don't know if I unduly complicated it there.
No, it reminds me of when Nevitt was talking about the heliocentric versus geocentric sense of planetary motion. And you, if you have a geocentric, you can still get accurate, right? It does give you a sense of what's going on. even if we standing outside of it, we say it's incorrect. So Newton, quote unquote, works in certain areas of physics, right? Isn't it the whole idea that when you get to the atomic and subatomic, and then you get to the very large, the whole proof of one of Einstein's proof was that gravity is bending light, with Eddington going down to Brazil to look at the eclipse. So it's getting back to what are the starting assumptions you have and where are you applying it? I thought I was supporting your point, Eric, but I'm
Yeah,
not sure
no,
if
no,
if what I said made any sense to anybody.
I saw that's consistent with the point I was making.
Yeah, okay.
Right. If you like, the theories may change, but the conditions of possibility for building those theories may not.
Sorry, Nevi, going back, I don't want to go back or repeat on the same topics that we covered already, but the comment that you just made that there is no space in itself, you wrote in the chat, space has meaning only in our experience. But what do you make out of that quotation that I mentioned, where he says on page 82, B44, space is real. It is objectively valid in regard to everything that we can encounter externally as object.
It's real, it's empirically real.
Yeah, but so is it empirical real, but at the same time, it's not a thing in itself?
Insofar as it's in itself is taken as non-empirical.
Yeah, no, I was just asking because I was reading Nevitt's comment.
Which one?
The one that you made in the chat at 8:14 p.m. It says things. No, sorry. It says there is no 8:13. There is no space in itself. Space has meaning only in our experience.
I mean, yeah, what I was just trying to get at is that, as I said in the next comment, that because space is the form of our empirical intuition, and as he says, like as far as we humans experience it, it's the form of our intuition. So by what I was trying to say is, therefore, space is not a condition of things in themselves apart from our experience. So and it's probably not very healthy to talk much about things in themselves, because almost anything you say about them is going to be false. But like I said in the comment, either if space is the precondition for our empirical experience, things in themselves either are not in space or it's not something we could possibly know, because all we can know is the way we experience space. So that's what I meant by that.
Oh, okay.
There's no, it's not like, like the conventional way of thinking about the space is, if you took out all the humans in the world, you've got this Newtonian absolute space. You have this giant empty space that's either finite or infinite, and it's got all these physical objects in it, and then human bodies show up and we are other physical objects, and then we start thinking about things. But for Kant, there is no, that's not the way our spatial intuition works. There isn't a already existing absolute space absent human cognition. Space is the way we experience space anyway, is the way we experience space, and not something that exists independently of our cognition. Is that right, Eric?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Kind of want to also point out that at the very end of the section that we read this week, he's talking about not being able to know the thing in itself in regards to space. in one sentence, and then the next sentence, the last sentence in that section is, nor on the other hand, is the thing in itself ever at issue in experience. So it seems like that's something he is trying to drive home, and I'm assuming he's going to talk about more later, that that doesn't just apply to space, that it's seemingly applies to everything for him.
Yeah, I mean, that's a matter, just a matter of definition. By definition, the thing in itself means the thing taken apart from our possible ways of experiencing it.
That makes sense. Also, I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna walk my dog before it gets dark. Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks for joining.
Thanks.
I have a question that doesn't have to do with math or geometry for that matter. The transcendental aesthetic is going to cover just space and time, right? There are other things in the world that presuppose empirical experiences, thinking like motion, that aren't going to be a priori forms of sensibility for Kant because he's not covering them in the transcendental aesthetic. I take it that's right.
He does say something about motion in the section on time, at least in the first edition. I can't remember exactly what he says, but I know he mentions it.
Yeah, the faculty of inner sense is you experiencing yourself. It's temporal.
So
can you imagine emotion that experiencing an emotion that has no relation to temporality? The experience has no relation to temporality.
but doesn't temporality only extend to objects as appearances and not things in themselves?
Right. You feel angry, which is to say you appear angry to yourself.
Right. So things appear at motion. Is that a correct way to understand that?
In motion?
In motion. But
Well,
they
yeah.
aren't, the thing in itself is not at motion.
Well, we don't know.
We don't know anything about the thing in itself. This is an abstraction.
Okay.
Right. This is, if you want, I mean, I don't know if I'm jumping, but I want to say the thing in itself is Kant's word for the target of dogmatic metaphysics.
Okay.
Henceforth, we don't know anything about that. We're just focusing on, like with Hume, we're just focusing on what appears in our experience, but then adding to Hume what experience presupposes. So inexperience, and then what experience presupposes.
Or actually, the way I was seeing it is that experience itself, it's a cognition. I think he says that at the beginning. Yes.
Yeah. I think that yeah, motion just like even I think like that like what Eric was saying, right? Like that the like you experience a sort of like inner, you can think of motion in, I think, several ways, like because I think when you said it, when you were trying to like open up the discussion, Tori, you were like, I don't know if I understood you clearly as to whether or not you were saying that it was kind of on the same level as space and time in a sense, like it was another, like it was something you were thinking of as like another thing that's kind of always present, right? Uh, in any possible experience like space and time, or if it's like, because I would see it as at least in this, like I could see how it's coherent to say that it's sort of a derived experience or appearance from these prior conditions, these priori conditions of space and time. Like, and a lot of people, I think, conceive of motion as just like change in space over time, which I don't know how you would like write that out. You could draw like a math equation, I guess, right? I mean, like, you know, I don't mean to, but I guess I'm just trying. That's what I'm saying. I'm trying to not misunderstand what you're saying.
Because motion is going to require some kind of empirical experience. I can't conceptualize motion without having experienced something moving.
So here's a thought experiment. I have never been in a full-blown deprivation tank. Chase and Joey forced me to go into what are those things called? Anyway, a float tank. They sort of shamed me into doing that. But that's not a full sensory deprivation. But but here's a thought experiment. My suspicion, if
We're
you could
trying to get
somehow,
you to go insane so that you could become one of the great ones.
oh right, that was a plot to make me go crazy.
Yeah.
We could become a great philosopher. That's
Yeah.
right.
You're welcome.
Sadly, Will, maybe I don't know. Anyway, we can debate how insane I am. But I'm wondering if you could somehow completely shut off your senses. My guess is you would still experience time. So for example, you could still count, right? And you would experience some kind of succession in your mind. So you might not, even if you don't have sensory access, just I think the mere ability to count implies that there's some experience of temporal movement.
Are you sure you spent long enough in the sensory deprivation tank?
No. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
You gotta take some tryptamines as well.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I'm off. I felt like we were getting a little loose with the language there, like with motion. But I mean, and with that being said, like, didn't we? I mean, isn't there again, quick, graduate student read right before class kind of deal? There's sensibility, right? Like the two aspects of sensibility. Like at the basement is like space and time. And so like the notion of like taking away sense your senses wouldn't be the same thing as taking away your sensibility, but it'd be damn near close to getting rid of your sensibility. But I thought like that was the thing, is like in virtue of being a sensible creature, these are X, Y, and Z things that must be the case.
But he says that space is the form of outer intuition and time is the form of inner intuition. So that's why if you could somehow eliminate outer intuition, so all you had was inner intuition, would you still experience time as the form of inner intuition? I was trying to argue you could, based on empirical evidence that I don't actually have.
You know what? I kind of almost I can relate to an experience. Did I tell you guys about the time I went scuba diving along a wall and we were told that if we left the wall we might see hammerhead sharks, and we left the wall so far that all I could see up, down, left, and right was blue. Sea blue. It was slightly lighter going that way and darker that way. So I did have space. I could tell up and down, but I was completely disoriented. I didn't know which way we came from, where the wall was, where the boat is, which you need to know when you're scuba diving. I was completely disoriented. But I had a track of time. It was going. Time was going, even though I was spatially disoriented. It's not, I don't know if that proves anything, but
Well, but there's also the situation where if you want to undermine someone and you control their environment, you mess with their sense of time. And that seems to be extraordinarily disruptive for a person to maintain their sense of self. So extreme form of gaslighting, you feed them 15 minutes after, well, a half hour after you fed them, but pretend it was 5 hours later. And if there's no windows, if there's no clocks,
Starting to
that's
sound like my workplace. That's how they treat the docket clerks and the paralegals. And it's quite miserable.
Ed, there are 4 lights. No, nope, no next gen. No, okay.
Well, if I worked in that environment, I would have a clock, if nothing else.
I'll just go for 150 beats per minute or more on the music, and that gets me right through the day. And, of course, Windows always has the clock right in the bottom corner for you to stare at and dream and pine for large fields, nice breezes.
I wanted to get back to Tori's point because I'm a little confused. I thought when you first started talk, were you talking from the very beginning, Tori, motion or emotion?
Motion.
Oh, okay.
And I
Okay.
think, I mean, I just made a comment about this, but I think I was caught up on the empirical experience of motion being contingent or conditional on time. Uh, but I think it's been
Oh,
explained to me now. I think.
Yeah, and we'll see later that I mean, space and time they're not entirely independent of each other either.
Yeah, this section in the Transcendental Aesthetic where he makes like a quick little paragraph about motion. He says, so his point is that the Transcendental Aesthetic cannot contain more than these two elements, space and time. So those are the two fundamental forms of intuition. And then the idea is, okay, what about motion? So then he says that all other concepts belonging to sensibility, they presuppose something empirical. So therefore they can't be pure forms of intuition or sensibility. And then he has this little thing about why motion also applies to that, in that maybe I should just read this. Even of motion, which unites both elements, space and time, presupposes something empirical. For this presupposes the perception of something movable. In space considered in itself, there's nothing movable. Hence, the movable must be something that is found in space only through experience, thus an empirical datum. In the same way, the Transcendental Aesthetic cannot count the concept of alteration among its a priori data. And that's beside the point, but that's what he says about motion. Just that quick, like 2 sentences or whatever. So that solves it for all time. We never need to think about anything else about motion ever again. Just kidding.
That's why I went to grad school, so I could get all the answers and not have to worry about it anymore. As all of you in grad school can attest. I did. I hesitate to say this because it might want to push us in toward a discussion that is about stuff that's going to come up later. But I just wanted to emphasize again a comment I put up there that when he says space is the form of when he's, I don't remember if he uses the word subjective or someone said it's the way the mind organizes information or something. It depends on what you mean by mind, because he's not saying that like right now I experience myself as having interior mental states, and he is not saying that that mind is what structures space for me. So he's not, say sophomoric reading of Kant, people say, oh my God, we each have a completely different subjective my experience of the world is completely different than yours because my mind structures space in one way and your mind structures space in another way. That's not what he's saying. Space and time. In fact, he's trying to do just the opposite. He's trying to show how space and time, in fact, are the same, have the same structure for every human. So it's, if you want, he does use the word subjective, but when he uses the word subjective, he's talking about, which again, we'll get to later, but transcendentally subjective, not empirically subjective. So it's not a function of my empirical, it's not like my mind constructs space in one way and your mind constructs space in another way. Not what he's saying. Like Eric said once, he's trying to, part of what he's trying to do is provide a grounding for Newtonian mechanics and explain why, if there's no absolute space, how is it that we all experience space in the same way?
And this is kind of what he's getting at when he says he wants to call it real, right? It's saying like this is objectively valid, it's real, potentially distinct from color and taste, which are more subjective in that qualified sense.
Yeah, I think color and taste and all that kind of stuff are subjective in that my experience and your experience, those are subjective in that way, whereas space is not. Like when I look at something and I see green, I don't know, you probably guys, some of you guys, I'm sure did this when you were in middle school or high school. It suddenly dawns on you, oh my God, when I say red and you say red, we may not mean the same thing because what I experience as red, you might, if I was in your mind, you might experience it as green, but it's all consistent. And so we use the same words. And, this kind of mind-blowing thing. And, and Kant might go, well, yeah, I mean, but that's a color. That's not space and time.
So, well,
We already talked about geometry some. Was there any more? Was that all perspicuous?
I don't know if we made explicit Kant's reasoning for insisting that we think of time in the first instance as a form of intuition and not as a concept. But explicitly in our reading, he says because a concept can't contain within itself an infinitude, only a form.
Curious about that.
Right. Okay. We did discuss that. Okay.
I don't know if we discussed it. I said I'm curious about it. That felt like what the numbers in the exposition, like 3 and 4, it feels interesting to me to distinguish why is it an intuition and not a concept.
Yeah, I think the main reason he states is that infinity that's implied with spatiality.
So is this that there's an old debate like forever as to whether there is a real infinity or whether you can conceive, because like I think Descartes said you can actually conceive of a infinity, and other people say no, you can't. Maybe Hume says no, all you can do is conceive of indefinite addition or indefinite, yeah. You can't conceive infinity as such.
So yeah, I think it's touching on that. And part of why I'm pointing it out is also it's here, and then anybody who wants to continue like a study of German idealism going forward. The notion of infinity kind of inherited from the infinitesimal calculus of Leibniz and Newton, right? That kind of bringing it to the fore, that notion of the infinitesimal in the calculus and Leibniz does a lot of work with infinity. Kant is positively using infinity to like make a point that this means that time and space are forms of intuition and not concepts. So he's defining concepts for Kant. Concepts can't contain infinity. And then later on, right, I think Fichte, Schelling, and Hegel will all have to visit the concept of infinity, and Hegel especially, right, with the bad infinity and the true infinity, right? But I'm just pointing it out because it's an important concept in the tradition, and it's being introduced here. We'll see where else it comes up.
That feels interesting, yet still confusing. The words that stuck out to me in that section were like under itself versus within itself. At least that's in the Geyer and Wood.
Where are you looking at again?
The fourth paragraph in the metaphysical exposition, B39 to B40. And that was like what was jumping out to me in that section. Something about concepts containing things under them, whereas
Yeah, I mean, am I wrong, Eric, just to think like when he talks about concepts containing things under them, you've got like the concept of animal, which includes the concept of insects, marsupials and all these different kinds, and then under each one of those you have other concepts. And is that what he's referred to when he says concepts under that kind of hierarchy?
I mean,
Yeah, that's a big piece of it. That's a big piece of it, right?
that feels connected to the third paragraph too, where when he uses where the idea of general versus space as kind of essentially single. As an intuition, it's essentially single. It's one and the same unique space.
That's right. I think, yeah, these two paragraphs, the third and the fourth, are really like, if you want to understand why he's insisting intuition and not concept.
I mean,
And
I found that fairly compelling that if you imagine, like if I try to imagine space as composed of conjoined spaces, well, really, like if really, I'm already thinking that there is a space that is containing, like I've got this big space box and this big space box, and that constitutes space. But in order to say that, I'm already assuming that they are taking up space. And, so I mean, I found that a fairly compelling way to think about it.
Pretty heavy. You like how I brought that back there, Joey? Start towards the end. I thought it was good too.
Jason, are you satisfied that the contradiction you brought up earlier was ironed out or resolved?
Yeah, I feel great. Honestly, if I had to do a commercial for the group, I would say you're more likely to have your doubts resolved if you attend than if you don't. It's not very sexy advertising, but
Well, I could always like join, cameraman, frontman. Uh, there's always that possibility, representative. And I mean, I guess for the viewers on YouTube, I'm a shapeless mob, so I could literally just be whatever they wanted. And isn't that the best thing? I think so.
Tristan is the body without organs.
There we go. There we go. Someone did it.
Yep. Yep. Pure potentiality.
That's also written on my kindergarten report cards.
Tristan is a body without organs. I'm sure your parents love that.
With rays shooting out of it.
Yeah, I liked how I just want to. This is just more of like a commentary now that we're thinking about big solar anuses and light beams and ass rats and whatever. Um, 1 second just to put this, just to say, I've liked the presentation thus far in Kant. It reminded me of like Spinoza, but like weirdly more like Spinoza just gets too, he's a little bit too like, okay, just bear with me on this, and then this, and then this, and then this, and then this. Okay, got all that? Let's go. Whereas I feel like, Kant is more treating me like he's giving with kid gloves. He's very gentle with me. You know what I mean? I feel like he's taking his time to go through each thing. Oh my God, okay. Um, but it's a lot of, like you were saying, setting up definitions. That's what I thought. Yeah, today was yeah, just a lot of like setting up definitions for some pretty, just fundamental concepts, intuition, transcendental aesthetic, space-time, boom, done. And I like that the reading was the same reading twice. Because I was like, ah, fuck off, like 14 pages. And I was like, oh, it's only 7 pages that are really hard. And then the other 7 are a little bit easier. Because I read it already. So I like this. I'm liking this one. This is good.
Yeah, I was greatly encouraged by the page number, and then I read it 4 or 5 times and still didn't understand it. And I'm like, well, if you're doing, I think that should be more of a point of concern when it's a short reading.
That's kind of nice in one way because you can pick basically anything that you want to fixate on that he has to say and just kind of dive in there, and it will eventually kind of lead you to the center, it seems. Um, I'm making the math part my bent, but I think you can just latch on anything and dive in. That's really nice. Not a lot of philosophies like that.
I agree. It's all connected. It's all connected. The Copernican turn implies this transcendental aesthetic, implies what comes next with the transcendental logic. And then the whole critical system. And you can enter in one, right? You can start with the groundwork and ask questions that you really need to visit the first critique to answer, right?
So here's the essay exam. Explain uh, how Kant's notion of space accounts for the synthetic a priori truths of geometry.
That's such an evil
That's a good one.
question.
Mm.
You just want to give me an F now, or you just want to go through the motions, or
No, seriously, that's a softball, guys. Come on. You can do it. I believe in you.
Eric, I respectfully F you.
But and I will give, and this is part of where I was coming from recently, where I was talking about this, that, there's there's a certain modesty, there's a certain simplicity and modesty in I mean, it's a Copernican revolution, yes, but I think somebody said this once before that it can be deceptive, but it can also be kind of good, depending on the context. If an idea comes across as if it was almost obvious, then I was like, oh yeah, that's sure, right, I don't really have any sort of route where, I mean, I guess unless I'm talking about non-Euclidean stuff, which I don't know. I mean, I know a little bit about from one book I read once, but aside from that, yeah, I feel like, I can understand the sense that it's a softball. When it's like, if because if you know one, you just keep thinking, just hold on to the thought, and you'll I don't know, just trust yourself. You know what I mean? Like I think that's what is like Tori is saying. Like it's all wrapped up, and it all kind of leads the thinking back to this. Hegel actually says that the thinking could have been tighter, but that the ideas are good. The conclusions are super, super solid. but he's like, oh, the dialectic at play, it's open to vulnerabilities that are exploited later, and also the general logic and transcendental logic thing. That's another point of contention way later, um, because Kant distinguishes them, and Hegel, I think, wants to show how they are one logic. They're one mighty sort of move, whatever, enterprise. Anyway, so yeah, I like it. And I can see how it's hard, but also I'm just saying, yeah, I get it.
Even there, I mean, I would, from what from what Hegel I get, he usually honors the distinction even as he sublates it, right? So like, this is good. This is a good distinction. It has its place. And if not for making the distinction, I wouldn't arrive at this third position, which kind of unifies so we needed it. We needed it, and we might still need it. Um, it's not as somebody tried to put earlier, rendering something irrelevant. You sublate, so everything that came before is now irrelevant. Oh shit. Sorry. That wasn't directed at you, Hunter.
My advisor in grad school, he taught a sort of survey course in continental philosophy, and he said continental philosophy is three things, and they all started with O, and I can only remember one of them, and he's no longer alive, so I can't ask him. But one of them was obvious, but it was what he said was that often with continental philosophers, they're absolutely impenetrable. But then once you do finally figure out what they're saying, you're like, well, yeah, of course. But it's like you have to put all this effort in, but once you kind of finally kind of get through that and you see what they're saying, it's like, well, yeah, that makes sense, but it takes a lot of effort to get to that point.
And I will say this too. I mean, I think I've made this point a few times with Nevitt, maybe a couple times. You guys have been subjected to it from me. But again, I love to read Adorno, and Adorno's hard to read. I love to read Hegel, and Hegel doesn't always put things in the most straightforward, understandable way. He likes to jazz it up a little bit and have fun while he's writing. I'm not even going to mention D&G. But Kant every time I read Kant, I get the impression like this guy is really trying to communicate to a broader audience, not the general public, but anybody who's interested in philosophy up to this point. You should be able to follow me. Can you get it? I'm trying to lay it out for you. I'm trying to lay it out, right? Not playing a game of, hey, can you decode my language here? Because if you do, it'll be wonderful, which I think there's a value to that, to be honest. Like, I like to read Adorno. He makes it challenging for a reason. However, Kant is not trying to make his language challenging. It's more of necessity. And he's taking pains to try and really just lay out his thinking. And part of the difficulty is that this is genuinely a transitionary moment in modern philosophy that he's kind of moving himself through. So, as he writes it down, a first edition and then a second edition, these are just stages in the transition of his thought.
But to be fair, I'm understanding Kant this time better than I ever have, but part of that's because I've been under the tutelage of Eric for a few years, and I've been trying to understand this stuff. And so when I start reading like this stuff, I think part of the reason that it's making more sense to me is because I actually kind of know what's coming. I kind of know where he's heading, and he's setting all this groundwork, he's setting all these foundations, and I can see why he's doing that because I have at least some sense of the direction he's going. But the first time you read this stuff and you don't have any real sense of where he's headed, it is quite challenging. I'm not disagreeing with Eric at all. I mean, I think he's being as perspicuous as he possibly can. He's defining his terms. He's very methodical. He's very systematic, but he's just throwing a lot of stuff at it. I mean, if you just look at all the words in the Pluhar that are italicized or in the Geyer and Wood that are in bold, I mean, it's just a ton of vocabulary, and all these terms are interrelated, and it just takes it takes a while to get enough enough purchase on these basic concepts to where things begin to emerge and you kind of see what he's doing. But I agree. I don't think he's trying to confuse us.
If anybody ever goes through my laptop or Apple Notes posthumously, it's going to be the most interesting thing ever because I have a whole section of philosophy vocabulary, and it's like Heidegger, objects as hands, ontic, ontological, Kant, and then it's right here like what is an intuition, what is sensibility, what is a judgment, and it's like you said, just trying to form the vocabulary in the presented system. It is a challenge for me, and I like, but and again, the big challenge, it's like going back through old code you wrote, like adding the comments to the notes of the philosophy to have it even make sense again, like the next day is hard for me sometimes.
I have to jump off. Thanks for everything. My dog is giving me sad eyes. So he wants to eat, go out for a walk. Yeah. Yeah, I see you, Merrick.
You should make your dog feel sad for philosophy.
He has for 2 hours. I think that's enough. That's enough. All right, later.
It's always the innocents that suffer.
See, if Mario had cats like some of us do, then it's just like you can pretty much ignore them and they get sad, but they have cat boxes, they have food bowls.
I handle it by walking my dog before our seminars.
If anyone says cats are low maintenance, they're lying to you.
Well,
Yeah, my newest cat, he does not take no very lightly and will definitely demand things. I can't, yeah, not very low maintenance. Except when that's only when I'm the only person there. If there's other people there, then he can easily ignore me and just be like, whatever. There's other people to give me food or whatever.
My cat's locked in the other room.
See,
What would it-
okay, so Smokey does not like any closed doors at all. He like just beat on them continuously until they're opened.
Oh, he doesn't
Yeah.
like it, but last time I was in the meeting with you all, he disconnected my webcam because he didn't like me staring at the screen. So, he gets locked in the other room for Zoom calls now.
Oh,
Both of my cats know that the doorknob is what opens and closes a door. And it's just fortunate for me, they don't have opposable thumbs. But they know exactly why that doorknob is there and they work it. They try to, hit it to make it open.
they're like raptors. They'll get in.
Seen those
I can't.
YouTube videos where cats jump up on those lever door, the doorknob, they're not knobs, but they're kind of lever things, and cats figure out how to jump on them and open the doors. And yeah, in the middle of the night, I heard a lot of obnoxious noise, and their cats had figured out how to get into the bag of cat food and opened it. So, well, let's see. Tori mentioned Wittgenstein's philosophical investigation. I have thrown that on the list numerous times, and nobody's bitten except for Joseph. So,
I have 2 minutes to go. Hunter's been strong, so I'm going to remain consistent with him. He's inspired me. So I would love to read it at some point. I still don't understand it, and I've read it several times. Would definitely like to have a group discussion, but right now it's Kant. I got to stay focused on Kant. Learn these concepts. What this philosopher is presenting.
well, after Kant, not all, but a whole lot of philosophers assume you have a basic grasp of Kant. So it's definitely good to have a basic grasp.
I hope I get there. I'm gonna slow but sure. Baby steps.
Well, any last insights, comments about cats and dogs?
I can't
I
use the rest
think
of
Kant is. I think Kant's a pretty cool guy. I'm just gonna say that.
No, I'm as far as reading goes, like I'm challenged and forming the concepts is a wrestle. But I think that's the sign of a good philosopher, and I think that struggle is important. Um, Otherwise I wouldn't learn. It's humbling for me always, any philosophy, but what's very helpful is this group discussion because I wouldn't be able to arrive at these on my own. So again, thank you for this.
Yeah. Okay, well, I guess we're done then for tonight.
I think so. I'm gonna go cuddle with my ferrets.
Yay, ferrets. Okay, we'll see you next time and thanks. Bye-bye.
Y'all all be
But
safe.
Bye.